Right, Cherubs, when we left off, Petey was just explaining to me how it is that I'm a funny guy but really don't know much about nutrition whatsoever, by quoting canon from scripture, and by supplying us with associative data sets as proof of a cause and effect claim. So that's taken 2 hours so far for us to get through that. And now we're back to something other than science again, because Peter wants to waffle inanely. So let's carry on where we left off last time and see what Petey has to say on Petey the Pumpkin Eater, that is. Petey Pumpkin Eater has to say about the ancients or something, as if that has much to do with what we're talking about here. But let's see how it feathers in. If you haven't seen part one, maybe go back and watch part one and then come back here after that. Right, Petey Pumpkin Eater.
It's relevant to talk about a little bit about the history of nutrition, and I'm just going to briefly mention Cicero. Okay, so Cicero is the greatest of all Romans, and one of Cicero's quotes was, "To not know what happened before you were born is to forever remain a child." So we should know a little bit about the history of nutrition and epidemiology. Okay.
Okay.
And it's pretty easy to go over some of the key points. So
it's pretty easy to brush over anything if you want to, Petey Pumpkin Eater. Let's see what your brush over looks like.
Here is the Mexican-American border between Arizona and Mexico. And these two populations, the Tarahumara people and the Pima people, they used to be kind of combined populations. And the Tarahumara still live in northern Mexico in the Sierra Madre Mountains, Copper Canyon area. And they eat their old-fashioned diet, lots of corn and beans and local greens. They're world famous. Their name almost means fleet runner. And they're famous for running ultramarathons.
Nothing to do with living in the mountains at all?
They'll run 100-mile in just 2 days, and it's like...
They all run 100 miles in 2 days, do they all? Is there any documentation of all of them doing this?
Every guy in town is not like just a fast guy. Nathan Pritikin was so impressed by them that he patterned his own...
Yeah, and you're pretty impressed with Nathan Pritikin. But that's not much of a recommendation, Peter.
Dietary style after them. And they've gone out there and tested them. A guy named Bill O'Connor went out there and checked, their total cholesterol average was around 136.
So?
They don't have a problem with hypertension, obesity, coronary artery disease.
So? All sorts of things could contribute to that finding, couldn't they, Peter?
So anyways, then the Pima, by comparison, they kind of adopted...
Now, I'm not saying that diet is not important in a person's presentation health-wise. It absolutely is, in my opinion. However, what you're inferring here, Peter, is that the diet is the only variable, which is false. Ergo, your entire logical structure is built on a crumbling cornerstone and will therefore fall down. And you will once again be made to look the fool you are by a remotely competent scientist such as myself.
Adopted Americanized ways and westernized diet, something akin to the standard American diet. They have tremendous problems with obesity, diabetes, hypertension, gallstones, and whatnot. And so this is a classic epidemiology.
Yeah, and I don't eat a standard diet for that very reason, Peter. You and I agree on that point. The standard Western or standard American diet is the single worst diet a human being can consume. About that, there is no argument, as I said. However, I eat basically a 100% carnivore diet, and I don't suffer from any of those conditions. There are also a large number of us now in this burgeoning community of people gaining their nutrition in a fashion similar, if not identical. Not much of that going on either, in any of them. It's almost like the problem is the diet in the middle. Short term. Long term, the carnivorous diet, there's no indication that that causes ill effect of any kind, except in theology, which we'll talk about more as Peter brings those kind of things up, which I'm sure he will. However, when you look at a vegan approach to life, nutritionally and all of that, well, there are some pretty serious problems, clearly, patently, factually, and anecdotally. Interesting.
Logical story. The more westernized the population, the fatter and sicker they get. Okay, here, by the way, was the Pima Indians, like back in the 1800s.
Yeah, that's all of them.
You know, they're really fit.
You mean this is an example of some of them?
And strong looking. They look like a college wrestling team, okay? And that's...
Oh, Peter, your wet dream fantasies really have no place in such an instructive video. Well, I say instructive video because that's what you're attempting to do. What you're actually doing is spouting off vacuous, pustulous, mindless, excremental ideology. Because we haven't seen a scrap of science from you from point dot in the interactions I've had with you. Not a single indication that you have any competence whatsoever in science or empirical inference making. You are a theologue. And you're also an ignorant buffoon with the worst case of Dunning-Kruger I've seen in a while. Anyway, what's next?
That's what humans...
The word is humans. There's an H on the front of it.
You know, are sort of designed to look like, okay? To be fit and skinny. All right, here's another... Okay, well, here's just a picture showing you a typical Tarahumara, you know.
Oh, well, I'm convinced now, Peter. Absolutely. You've shown us... My word. This is what I'm talking about, kids. This is what we're dealing with. And in the comment section under the original video here that I'm critiquing, Peter has commented under his own thing, congratulating himself, making out like this is some kind of embarrassment for me. Okay, alright, I'm the one that should be embarrassed, apparently. Go on though, Pete.
Guys who can run 100 miles in 2 days. Here's a typical,
you said that.
You know, American or Pima cabbage's coronary artery bypass graft because of atherosclerosis in the arteries of their heart, coronary artery disease, ischemic heart disease, same thing.
Right, so you're saying that these guys ate a standard diet and the Tahururu whatever both lived in the mountains and didn't, and the ones in the mountains did much better? Well, shock me. So what? That's no surprise. We'd expect that.
Getting their sigmoid colon resected for diverticulitis, appendicitis, surgical scar, gallbladder surgical scar. Then they get a BKA, below knee amputation for diabetes. Okay, the Tarahumara, like I said, when they go out there and study them, they're incredibly healthy. Their average cholesterol was 136.
Yeah, but someone's cholesterol level, unless it's low, is not an indication of their health status. If it's low, it means they're in poor health, most likely. And 136 is a bit low. Frankly, it seems from 168 countries and territories, several billion with a B person years of follow-up, that the association would suggest to us that the ideal cholesterol level in a person, i.e. that which is associated with the lowest mortality from all causes and from every sub-cause, is around about 220. Okay?
6. And it's good to have a lower cholesterol.
No, it isn't, Peter. That's your opinion. And it's vapid, vacuous, incorrect, ill-educated, and wrong.
What raises cholesterol? Eating meat and saturated fat.
As it should.
Okay, here's another...
And actually, if you're keeping up with the literature, it seems like, the dietary thing might not be such a player after all. On average.
Population, the Yanomamo in, South America, the Amazon jungle at sort of the border of Venezuela and Brazil. And, they'll keep the same blood pressure from their teens into their elderly years.
Well, that's no surprise.
Which is characteristic of somebody eating a plant-based diet who doesn't...
No, it isn't. It's characteristic of a person who is not subjecting themselves to conditions that would lead to the hypertension problems that we do find in Western society. Again, with, how many degrees of freedom are uncontrolled here? Do these guys differ from Western populations only in that their diet is different, Peter? No. There are many factors that separate those populations. This is ridiculous still.
And add salt to their food versus most Americans, the vast majority of them end up hypertensive. Okay, the ones that live into their later years especially. Okay, Norway had a lot of dairy in its center, not so much in its periphery. In the center, they had a lot more autoimmune disease, like multiple sclerosis, for example. Finland, where they used to have a lot of dairy and a lot of meat, tons and tons of coronary artery disease, but around the 1970s, the 1980s, they hired this guy, Pekka Puska, a physician out there, especially in this province called Karelia, And as they minimized their intake of saturated fat and animal foods, they had a dramatic improvement, like an 84% reduction in cardiovascular mortality.
No, in fact, we need the absolute outcome statistics so that we can discuss that finding and its relevance or otherwise to any living human being over a 100-year life span, or not, and you'll find the answer is not, actually, in these statistical things. I mean, they find statistically significant results, but they find statistically significant results that are very, very small actual outcome results. They are statistically significant because of the sample size, not because the effect size is big enough to even be useful, meaningfully, for any one given living human being. Ever. And that's even if the relationship that they're reporting there is A, a true relationship as observed rather than as adjusted, which it will be, and B, causal, which it isn't. It's an associative data set, which can, therefore, not inform on causality. There are many populations of people around the world that had all sorts of changes in their health status at large, in line with all sorts of changes that occurred in their living conditions at various times throughout history that we could go back to if you like, Peter. This is incredible, by which I mean lacking in credibility, Peter.
That's an incredible reduction. And as easy
incredible is, when referring to the change in a data set, is completely inappropriate, Peter, because that's the whole point of a data set. It's empirical. It's numbers. They don't need your descriptor. That's a value judgment statement. Okay, and we also need to use the word incredible in the correct way, which I just did prior to you using it. Meaning lacking in credibility, Peter, i.e. you. Right?
Easy. Just avoid, the saturated fat, the animal foods, reduce your dietary sodium intake.
So now you're claiming cause and effect, which this ridiculous nonsense is completely unable to establish. Completely unable. We're back again to the same old adage of, yes, 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 this is associated with that, you say. Well, sunburn is associated with sales of ice cream. Do we ban ice cream?
Okay.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is all the epidemiology supports this.
No, none of the epidemiology supports anything whatever regarding cause and effect, hazard, risk, or likelihood of any outcome of any kind in any person living anywhere on the planet, past, future, or present. No, Peter. Epidemiology, health outcomes epidemiology, simply has no value or place above being hypothesis generating. That is its place, at the absolute bottom of the barrel, scraping on the bottom of the barrel. Just above personal N=1 anecdotes, Peter. That's the place of epidemiology and health science. Now, when you have a health science epidemiological finding that is convincing, then there is its value. Example, the incidence of lung cancer as associated with pack years of smoking, compared with reference who do not smoke. Huge, huge difference in the outcomes. Massive. Look at any epidemiological study on any hard health outcome in human beings over any period of time as that relates to any aspect of diet in any way, and you will find outcome statistics so close to zero as makes absolutely no odds to any given living human being over a 100-year lifespan, Peter. Those are the facts. I'm sorry about that. The mere fact that words are written on a page by people who have done an epidemiological study does not make those words on that page factual. You have to read the statistics and understand them, Peter, to be able to comment on them. in a sensible way. That is where you fail.
Okay, if you eat tons of sodium like the Japanese did in the 1960s and smoke cigarettes, you get hypertension.
Well, I wonder what's happening there.
And you'll have a tendency to get intracranial atherosclerosis. This has been called Asian atherosclerosis. If you eat the high-fat diets of the Westerners, this has been called Western atherosclerosis. You get especially coronary
So opinions again, Peter.
artery disease, but you also get carotid artery in the neck atherosclerotic disease. Oh yeah, one more population with regard to the Japanese. The Japanese, when they ate primarily the rice-based diets, they were pretty healthy despite smoking a lot and a lot of sodium. The Okinawans
So?
were even healthier, and that's all
Says who, Peter? According to what data set?
because the Okinawans didn't need all that sodium. Okay.
No, that's your guess, Peter.
Okay. They ate a lot of sweet potatoes, and then they ate these populations, you know.
You forgot the biggest part of their diet there, Peter. It's pork. Pork. Okay?
The rice also is only 1% of calories from fat. Sweet potatoes only 1% of calories from fat.
So what?
Okay.
Okay.
You know, at this time, their average age was female dying was 86, male around 78 years of age, which is really, really good. The only
According to whom? Genetically, Peter, we're all designed at birth to live somewhere between 120 and 150 years if we just got out of our own stupid way.
longer lived population in the world was the Seventh-day Adventist.
No, it isn't, Peter. Not at all. Given the records that the people making these claims have seen, that's what they're claiming. Doesn't mean it's a fact.
And they're vegans. They're a subset of the vegans.
They're not, Peter. They're not at all. Less than half of people who identify as members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church are vegan. In fact, it's about 8% of them. Well under half. See, I'm being conservative. So your statement there is not only false, it's misleading. It's a lie. It's just total misinformation to suit an ideology.
They had the women live in about 88.6 years on average and men about 85.3 years.
Can we have a look at the records of births, deaths and marriages and forensically analyse those records for accuracy and completeness? Can we do that? I think you'll find you can't, Peter. So if you actually did your homework on this topic, if you actually dig beneath these ridiculous ad nauseum repetitions of this ridiculous propaganda festival that you've got going on here and actually check the claims that you're making, you'll see how badly wrong and misleading this ridiculous nonsense is. The records are not good enough to be able to actually accurately say this is definitely the age of most of the people actually on Okinawa who claim to be centenarians, in fact. Go and check that out, Peter.
And that's much, much better than other persons were doing. In California in 1985, the average female is about 79.6 at a time of death, and average man about 73.8.
Yeah, but so what? What does that have to do with this theological ongoing discussion between you vegan theologue buffheads and those of us over here who have connected with objective reality and who realise that humans are obligate hypercarnivores? Because you're not comparing carnivores with vegans. Still, Peter, you're comparing vegans with the standard diet. And I agree with you, the vegan diet is better than the standard diet, at least for the first couple of years, perhaps. Thereafter, the health failure will begin. And 84% of people quit the vegan diet within 5 years, and 90% of those people say it's because of catastrophic health failure born of nutrient deficiency. Peter.
Okay, so I call this Bart K. Judgment Day.
Except you haven't made a single point which even scratches any of the arguments I've made on any topic so far, Peter. You've provided associative data sets that are fabricated as proof of cause and effect relationships at large without qualification. You've quoted theology at me, actual theology, biblical stuff, as proof that I'm wrong somehow about the fact that you're wrong completely and utterly. It's stunning. The projection is unbelievable. It's laughable. Upwards of 30,000 people have had a good laugh at your expense, Peter, and that number seems to be growing weekly. It seems to be a popular line of videos. So you keep talking, son. Keep talking.
Okay, so what are some of the other points in here? Some of this is a repeat. I was mostly interested in this slide for epidemiology. Oh, the blue zones of Dan Buettner. His original lecture, he said...
Yeah, Dan Buettner, journalist, theologue, someone putting an idea together, didn't actually prove anything about any zones or provide us with any data that would lead us to believe what the vegans tell us to believe about these so-called blue zones. I've actually covered blue zones, I don't know in how many movies in the last 6 years that I've been doing this. Go and find one of them. Blue zones. No.
Said they were 95% or more plant-based.
But that's false, Peter. That is a lie. There are no blue zones where the diet is 95% plant-based or above. None. None at all. It's just a lie. It's incredible.
As more recent lectures, now he starts saying 90%. There's always pressure to back off on 100% vegan, even though it's the best.
It's not, Peter. That's your opinion, and it's absolutely fucking inane. It's the stupidest thing I've heard since the vegan diet is the best diet for people. Oh, hang on. That's the same stupid thing.
Let's see. We talked about Papua New Guinea. They eat, 93% of their calories from sweet potatoes, 1% fat. They're skinny and fit.
That's false, Peter. And even if it was true, so what? What other aspects in the lifestyles of Papua New Guineans might have an effect on their health presentation? Or do they differ from Western people only in that they eat a lot of sweet potatoes? I bet you they eat a lot of pork too. Like the Okinawans that don't eat any pork. Remember those ones? That don't exist? Yeah, same thing with the Papua New Guineans, I would suggest. My word.
Plus, they had 6 times less cancer than Americans did because
Americans eat the standard American diet, which is the worst possible diet a human being can live their life on. Yes.
Americans that smoke similar amounts, with all the fat they're eating, it's synergistically increasing the risk of cancer.
No, there is no science existent anywhere to underpin that claim, Peter. That is your opinion. And your opinion isn't worth shit, son. Because you are an actual bona fide imbecile. The Dunning-Kruger drips from every pore of your being. The only value you have is in grist for our comedy mill over here. We are laughing at you. You are so destitute. That's incredible.
Somalis who were in South America and other population, indigenous, endemic, eating primarily plant-based diet, they had like the best results of any population ever studied for cardiac calcium CT. Hardly any calcium in the coronaries from atherosclerosis. Yeah,
you'll find that the same thing occurs in a carnivore population on any... those that have been on a carnivore diet for 5 years or more. Universally, they report 0 score or close to 0 score, or at least a huge regression from a previous score. Maybe you should check that out, Peter. Maybe there's some substance to that. Hint, there is.
All the epidemiology studies you go to, they're all going to show you the same thing. You're better off.
They're all going to show you absolutely nothing of value as relates to human health outcomes and nutrition, any aspect of nutrition, in any way. None of those studies are capable of informing on cause, effect, hazard, risk, or likelihood of anything in any person at any time, ever. Fact. Can we move on?
Off the more plants you eat. European graveyard studies where they had to dig up a bunch of graveyards for construction work. The ones where the rich aristocrats were buried where they ate a lot of meat. They have a lot of spinal dish.
Were they carnivores, Peter? No? So Randall cycle was an issue then, was it? Good, okay. Can we move on?
Which means diffuse idiopathic skeletal hyperostosis. It's also significant because it's associated with hypertension, diabetes, coronary artery disease, and
well, you're only going to get diabetes by eating sugar, so there is probably confirmation of what I'm talking about. Randall cycle is the problem here. Mixed diets in the rich people, including meat because they could afford it. The paupers on the meat poor diet weren't having those issues precisely because they weren't activating the Randall cycle. But I bet if you look at the life expectancy of the rich versus the poor, that might be interesting.
Whereas the peasants, they're eating turnips and plant foods. They have hardly any dish of their spine. So you can also think of it as being spinal degeneration. Okay, European World War II rationing studies. So when the populations rationed meat and oils, dietary oils, they had a reduction in their obesity, their diabetes, and their coronary artery disease, despite the psychological stress. The point being is the diet was more important than the psychological stress. We talked about Finland.
And those people at that time, under those circumstances, possibly, we'd have to go and look at that paper to see whether there's any veracity in that claim at all, Peter. I suspect there's probably not, given that you think there is. And in any case, what the purple fuck has this got to do with whether or not the vegan diet is a good idea, because it still isn't, and whether the carnivore diet is a good idea, because it still is, apparently.
Demeatification. In China, also related to the book The China Study by T. Colin Campbell.
So a work of fantasy by a pseudoscientist who couldn't get it published. A study that has been debunked completely on thousands of occasions by multiple academics, including but not limited to myself, Peter. Okay?
The populations were typically eating like as much as around 90% of their calories from white rice.
Okay, can you back that claim up, Peter, with anything? Any proof at all? Because I simply do not believe you.
Or 1980, especially in the 1970s, let's say, and they had hardly any diabetes or autoimmune disease. Less than 1% of the persons having diabetes. Remarkably low.
So, what other factors were at play differentiating that population from any other population at the time, Peter? How long is that list of things that could be confounding, or a covariate, or a collinearity, thus destroying the ability of this data set to provide us with any meaning in the real world? And is it adjusted? What were the absolute outcome statistics? Still no? Okay.
Whereas now China has a lot more of this one-child policy. The kid's spoiled, gets fed more animal foods, more processed food, and their incidence of diabetes and obesity and diabetes is going up.
And nothing else has changed in the interim except the diet. Nothing at all, Peter. Is that what you're suggesting? So these things were around hundreds of years ago, were they? Kids were doing this all day for hundreds of years ago, were they, Peter? The ridiculousness, the facility, or lack of facility, really, the absolute nonsense being spewed forth by you here, son, is embarrassing for you and for your tribe. It is seriously, vastly, hugely beyond the point where you need to understand that you're finished here, and what we need from you ongoingly from this point forward is silence until you can learn the first thing about science. Okay? Because as it is right now, you've got no idea whatever of what you are talking about. You are spouting mindless theology. And we are laughing in your face.
A lot as they become more westernized in their diets. People sometimes bring up the Maasai, and the Maasai, yeah, they do tend to be skinny, a lot of them, but they've done autopsy studies on them, and they have lots of atherosclerosis. They eat a lot of meat in their diets.
Probably more to do with the sugar that they intake in the form of milk, it would seem. Actually, and the interaction of said milk sugar with fats being intaken at the same time, ergo the Randall cycle. Peter, go and look it up. Learn something. Or watch my video on it. My recent one. Updated version. It's the best one so far.
The Eskimos also are much less healthy than was
presently or historically, Peter?
Previously thought. Dr. McDougall wrote a whole long essay about all their health problems.
Who cares what the itinerant imbecile wrote? Science is done empirically with numbers. You haven't supplied us, Peter, with any numbers at all in anything you've said that I've ever heard so far since I met you several weeks ago. Not one word has come out of your mouth that is backed by any empirical evidence of any kind, and you haven't supplied any. You've just splashed things up on the screen that are either pseudoscience, ill-disciplined claptrappery, opinion statements, or outright actual theology, Peter. Now, I'm not against theology, but there's no place for theology in a scientific discussion. What's next?
It's also been mentioned that they tend to have a genetic mutation that makes them less inclined to go into ketosis.
It's not generally tend to, Peter. It's an absolute knockout of that gene in that population. You don't even understand the genetics going on here? Why are you commenting on things that you know nothing about, Peter? What makes you think it is okay and indicated for you to come online and say things to people that are outright demonstrably fallacious nonsense? What do you think gives you that right?
Which thought might be a little bit protective with their high meat, high fat diet. Okay, here's a general overview summary of the major different dietary patterns, and basically the average
put together by whom on the basis of what?
American westernized diet is pretty poor in almost every single way. A lot of diet.
According to whom, Peter? Because we've seen what your competence is to discuss what a good diet is, and it's none. You don't have the first clue of what you're talking about at all. No idea at all.
Diabetes, high blood pressure, myocardial infarction, heart attack, stroke, impotence, cancer, bad. All right. Then you look at the East Asians, which means like the Japanese, the Koreans, and the Chinese. And their problem was eating way too much sodium.
That's your opinion, Peter. Can you back that up with anything?
Because they ate a very low percentage of calories from fat,
you can't eat calories, Peter. Calories cannot be eaten.
Had a protective effect.
No, effect is the conjugate of cause. Protective is a cause and effect statement, inherently, anyway. There is no data to underpin that claim, Peter, still. No, wrong again.
And look, they got a relatively low incidence of diabetes. They also ate a lot of fruits and vegetables, which was also protected. Their cigarettes...
Is this data adjusted at all, Peter? i.e. fabricated?
Smoking was bad. So they would still get a lot of hypertension from the sodium. The cigarette smoking contributes to that.
That's your opinion.
But they compensated for reasonably well by having low fat and getting the fruits and vegetables. So they still have pretty good lifespans, like the Japanese, for example.
How much is pretty good?
The Indian diet, you know, I always thought everybody from India was healthy because I have a lot of Indian friends, okay, and they're skinny and energetic and everything. But it turns out persons from India have a relatively high incidence of diabetes and coronary artery disease. And after talking to a lot of...
Also, they have the highest incidence of veganism in the world, Peter. Isn't that incredible? Because we all know that cause and effect can absolutely be established with an association. So there you go, Peter.
Yeah, there's some sat fat from the ghee butter. I think, though, my impression was a lot of them eat way too much fried food, and they cook with oil, many of them. And I think that's leading to their high incidence of diabetes and coronary artery disease. And then how do you win the game of health? Your best chance is low-fat, low-sodium vegan.
No, it isn't, Peter. There is no evidence to underpin that claim extant anywhere on the planet, and there never will be. That is your opinion. It's false. It's ridiculous. It's demonstrably not backed by science of any kind. It's misinformation of the highest order, in fact, it would seem, on the basis of the clear and unequivocal fact that human beings are absolutely demonstrably obligate hypercarnivores, we're done here. You have presented your opinions, theology, actual theology, associative data as proof of cause and effect somehow. You've dropped names, you've dropped appeal to authority fallacies left, right and centre, and the people whose authority you're leaning on are bona fide, absolutely unquestioningly imbeciles. No surprises there. You've said nothing whatever to convince anybody with more than 3 brain cells that anything you have had to say is correct or of utility to anyone ever. It's embarrassing for you.
You know, they're low on all this stuff. And they got the fiber. It's just the healthier. Just humans are designed for that.
No, they're not, Peter. Clearly, demonstrably, absolutely and unequivocally not at all. We are designed as obligate hypercarnivores. Okay,
the more, you know, people say, oh, are eggs a good food? Look, you know, the more eggs you feed a person, the more atherosclerosis you get. In an experimental study, if you want to induce atherosclerosis, you feed them eggs, okay? It's a perfect way to do it. If you want to make animals fat, feed them a lot of food with a lot of MSG in it. It'll get them to eat more. That'll make them fat. And then persons who are fat are predisposed to increased risk of death.
Hang on, you were talking about animals and now you're talking about persons. Sure, persons are an animal, but do all animals do best on the same sort of diet? No, Peter. Every animal on this planet is a specialist, evolved in a specialist niche to gain their nutrition using a specific dietary pattern and a specific tactic for gaining that nutrition. Humans are no exception. We are obligate hypercarnivores, Peter. No two ways about it.
Diabetes, increased risk of...
No, you're talking about risk. No, there are no studies that inform on risk. Still. Not one.
High blood pressure, increased atherosclerosis.
So what were the outcome statistics of this paper, that were the one that you've just splashed up for a few minutes to circle some words and tell us that the study absolutely proves something? How about we have a look at the studies, see what the outcome statistics were, see what was studied, in what population, over what period of time, under what conditions? No? Of course we don't do that. Do you know why? Because within seconds, any one of these papers that Peter is pulling up on the screen here can and will be torn to shreds by anyone with any scientific nous whatsoever. You're welcome.
Okay, now what about these diets with regard to atherosclerosis? So first,
well, what about them?
Oh, we've got, you know, the Ornish work again. He did...
No. Ornish didn't do any science. A prospective randomized controlled trial, you say? Ah, right. Over how long? Over a year? So, because this was a controlled study, what he would have had to have done is lock those people in labs for a year. Did he do that? No. This is not a controlled trial. This is a sort of nearly controlled trial. Ergo, it may or may not be able to supply us with an inference that's of any value. How many subjects were there? Let us see. 28. N equals 28. I think we're done with the Ornish study now because there's no statistical power there. Okay, so it wasn't well controlled or properly controlled. A year is actually quite short term anyway. And there were 28 participants. We're done.
Great work in here. This is a randomized controlled trial.
No, it isn't. I've just explained why it isn't. Giving one example within seconds. It's nearly, perhaps, but not quite, is it? No.
Patients put on a low-fat vegetarian diet.
Okay, so how do we know they followed it? And also, they stopped smoking, those that were smoking as well. Whoops! Which one of those things is more likely to be associated with an improvement in health after a year? Oh, dear! Peter. Whoops. Looks like we're not doing science here. Ornish never does science. Ornish wouldn't know science if it bit him on the arsehole. In fact, Ornish wouldn't know his arsehole as opposed to his elbow if I labelled both of those and taught him how to read. He's an imbecile, Peter, as are you. Okay, what's next?
Also stop smoking, did some stress management.
Oh, and stress management, as well as the stop smoking. So which one of those things affected the outcome variable, Peter, and to what degree? Shall we wait for that? Oh dear.
A little bit of moderate exercise, but the big thing is a diet.
How do you know, Peter? How do you know? See, that's what scientists do, is they vary one thing in an experiment. They keep everything else controlled and the same. Because if you don't do that, you can't make a decent inference on cause and effect, and your paper is therefore ergo of value none, except as a publication for its author. It's rubbish. The people that published this study ought to give themselves several uppercuts, because this is not how we do science. This is how we do theology. This is how we do ideology. This is how we do propaganda. Okay?
They had a marked reduction in their coronary artery atherosclerotic
What was marked?
disease.
How did we assess their carotid artery disease? How did we do that?
Okay? Without
Okay. No, it's not okay, Peter. You have no idea what Ornish even did in this study, or what the outcome statistics were, or even where to find them. Because you won't find them actually in this abstract, the meaningful ones. Because I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that Ornish didn't do a power calculation on his 28 subject study.
the use of lipid-lowering drugs. And initially it was a 1-year study, but then he did a follow-up study with 5 years follow-up on many of the patients.
See this here, up here? I'm going to circle it there with my mouse. There's an erratum published. Somebody has pointed out an error in this paper, and that's been published. Are we going to talk about that?
And they had a further reduction of their coronary artery disease.
Yeah, but which intervention caused that, Peter, if any of them did? Because this study design is unable to give us that information precisely because of the fact that someone's heart health outcomes are a hard-baked outcome, multi-threaded tapestry, and if you change several things, you don't know which one it was that had the effect, if any of them did. Okay? This isn't difficult, even if you do have an IQ below about 80, which I'm starting to wonder, Peter.
So that's, big stuff. There's other...
No, it isn't. It's a big pile of turd, dressed up as science, which is only going to fool a charlatan and an imbecile. Hello, Peter, you've been fooled. You're a charlatan and an imbecile. What's next?
Other examples of people showing that you could dramatically reduce coronary artery disease, like the Kempner data, Pritikin's experience, McDougall's experience, and other persons.
Yes, of course. You can absolutely regress cardiovascular disease. Yes.
Like the work of Armstrong, etc.
But none of the people that you're talking about here, Peter, have demonstrated it. None of these are scientific, experimental investigations into this cause and effect. Now, when I say yes, absolutely, you can regress heart disease, I say that because we have seen it. What we are unable to do is point the finger of cause and effect at any diet, because no such science exists. Ergo, we go to a logical construction. We propose a mechanism by which our favoured diet might be able to produce this outcome. And if you produce such an outcome genuinely in a person, then fine, I have no problem with that. But don't claim it was your diet when, for example, just one of them there, the Esselstyn diet, was another one where they failed to control things. They failed to moderate one thing and only one thing that could have had an effect on the outcome. It was a naturalistic observation on a small sample size of people who were self-selecting. Anyway, that's for another day.
But still, the more you lower fat and you lower saturated fat, the lower cholesterol goes, the less atherosclerosis.
That is not so, Peter. That is another lie. It's a repeated lie from you. You have been unable to establish that claim precisely because there is no data that can support that claim. That claim was a cause and effect claim. Sorry about that.
The humans or the primates get. In animal research study, they found the same thing. T. Colin Campbell, did even more research on prevention and reversal of coronary artery disease. So here's
no, he didn't. In fact, there was no good science produced by that author anywhere in the literature whatsoever.
His book, Prevent and Reverse.
There was theology. This isn't actually even peer-reviewed literature, is it, Peter? This is someone's book. Anybody can write a book. Anybody at all.
Coronary artery disease. He cites all the papers in there, and he did his big study, was a real famous one, in the Journal of Family Practice.
It wasn't a study. It was a naturalistic observation without control. It had several interventions. Ergo, we don't know which one, if any of them, was the effector. Maybe none of them were the effector, and a fifth, sixth, and seventh variable that we didn't even consider might have actually been the effector that we don't know. This study does not establish anything at all.
2014, and what he showed was his patients had a 99.4 reduction in
99.4 what?
Risk of
no risk. No, there are no studies that inform on risk, much less this one. Peter, wrong again.
A recurrent event, cardiovascular event. Major events were, things like a stroke or a heart attack, for example. The recurrent rate was 0.6%. That's incredibly low.
Incredible is not a scientific assessment of a data set. Incredible is a good assessment of what you are, Peter, lacking in credibility.
0.6%. And he even says that one patient who had the event didn't follow the diet.
They did it wrong and they never really were a vegan.
By the way, there's nothing...
This diagram, by the way, it is in the paper that Peter is referring to right now, but it is not from the study that is being spoken about in this paper. This is a diagram borrowed from elsewhere. And it actually shows nothing, because you see how this isn't numbers? This is images of varying qualities. The quality of the imagery may well have had a very serious effect on how it's read. The way that this is coloured in this image makes it look or appear a certain way, perhaps. But it's not actual numbers, is it? Interesting stuff.
Like this in coronary artery disease management that's anywhere remotely close to this. But it doesn't get taught or doesn't catch on in conventional medicine.
So now you're inferring, because this graphic here, this imagery here, appears in the paper you're talking about, you're just assuming that this is imagery based on the data collected by the authors of the paper that you're currently talking about. It isn't. It's a reproduced chart from a completely different paper, Peter. See, if you'd read the thing, you'd know that. If you were remotely able to critically assess science at all, you'd be careful about what you say online. You'd actually look into everything you say before you say it, so that you're unassailable by people like me who will be out here wanting to take a shot. You notice how there are quite a few people out there taking shots at me, Peter? They're all taking shots at me personally, though, aren't they? They're not taking shots at my arguments. I wonder why that is. It's because I am fucking unassailable, Peter. That's why. What's next?
Medicine, because there's no money in it. You train somebody in the vegan diet, you don't get paid, or maybe you bring them to a course, you get $1,000 or something. You do a stent, $30,000. You do a open heart surgery, you can make $120,000, $150,000 all told, all together. So any hospital that wants to stay in business and make money, it's going to want open heart surgery for the money in comparison with going low-fat vegan, which empowers the patient.
No, it doesn't. It's anti-humanist. It will slowly break that patient down, destroy their health, and eventually kill them if they don't wake up first.
So here's Esselstyn's words again. 99.4% of adherent patients avoided major cardiac events.
Adherent to what, though, Peter? Did you read what they did in this study? Did you read it? You clearly didn't, because now you're inferring that the diet was the only thing that Esselstyn asked his patients to do, and it isn't, is it, Peter? Whoops. End of. What's next?
Here's an example of a abnormal cardiac cath, coronary artery.
What that looks like to me is a very, very poor quality, very grainy image, which is very questionable on that basis.
Angiogram, where the vessel's quite narrow. Stenotic is the medical word for that.
And, even if it is a correct statement that that artery at that time is stenotic, so this doesn't even come from the Esselstyn paper. Bullhead.
And after following 32 months on a plant-based diet.
What does that mean? And so what? What else happened?
It resolved. It got better. It doesn't always get better. The component of the atherosclerotic plaque due to fat, necrotic core, lipid core.
See, you just made another error there, didn't you, Peter? You said the atherosclerotic plaque due to fat. Well, it isn't due to fat. Fat is not the cause of atherosclerosis, any more than is cholesterol or any of the lipoproteins or any fraction of that. None of those things cause atherosclerosis, Peter.
That can all resorb, virtually completely, but, the calcium...
Yeah, but let's have a look at what happens to CAC scores, for example, as an indicator of metabolic cardiovascular health in a fully carnivorous population over 5 years to a decade or longer in terms of their CAC. You'll find they're regressing too. It's almost like the diet in the middle, the standard diet, is the problem in terms of atherosclerosis. Which we know, Peter, we know that. What you're falsely doing is conflating a mixed diet with a carnivore diet, because they're not the same thing, are they, Peter? One of them is mixed and one of them is not so much. What's the missing component on the carnivore diet? It's the carbohydrates. Okay, what's the missing component on the vegan diet? Well, it's the fats. The mixture of carbohydrates and fats in the diet is the problem, Charlie Brown. We know this. This isn't news to us. What's next?
Calcified part, the acellular fibrotic part.
So the only thing left then to decide if you want to be a vegan or whether you want to be a carnivore is, do you want to have to quit that ideology within 5 years citing catastrophic health failure born of nutrient deficiency or not? If you do want to do that, if you want your health to catastrophically fail you, most likely it seems, within a 5-year period, most likely it seems, then perhaps you should go vegan. If you don't want that, then perhaps you should eat a diet which is appropriate for your speciation, human being, and that is obligate hypercarnivore. It seems.
Not as well. But still, this is remarkable. It's
not remarkable. Well, it's remarkably bad as a quality of inference of anything, and it's as far from science as I've ever seen.
Paper showing paleo, keto, carnivore, low carb, any of those meat, high fat diets does this. I've never heard of that. I've never seen it. I don't think it exists as far as I know. And it wouldn't make sense for it to exist. You would expect those to work.
Yeah, but Peter, what you think makes sense has got nothing to do with what actually makes sense in any aspect of reality, clearly.
Person it. Every time I've read about it, they do. Okay, regression of atherosclerosis in primates and man.
Yep, so what? We know that occurs.
The Mark Armstrong paper. And so basically, he found how do you reverse atherosclerosis in an animal? You remove the stimulus, you remove the lipids, okay?
That's not the stimulus, Peter. The stimulus is the mixture of lipids with carbohydrates. That's the stimulus. You could also just as well remove all the carbohydrate, leaving only the lipid behind, and get the same results. The fact that that work hasn't been done doesn't mean that it will be wrong, because that's what will happen, because the problem is the Randall cycle, the diet in the middle, the mixed one. I've covered this already, remember? Remember, it was that thing you didn't even know existed, the Randall cycle. The thing that you pretended you did know existed by saying, oh yes, I haven't studied that for a while. Well, if you really are an expert in human physiology, human nutritional needs, human anything to do with health, Peter, you would understand the Randall cycle inherently and wouldn't need to go and review it. Because you'd know what it does, why it does it, and why it should be avoided. But that's got nothing to do with providing any reason why the vegan diet might be a good idea, because it still fucking isn't.
So the key was lowering the amount of lipids.
In this study, done at that time, Do the same thing with removing the carbs and see what you get.
Okay, low fat decreases risk of atherosclerosis.
So once again, with just picking out words that you like the look of, pointing to them, underlining them, saying, look at these words. Science is done empirically, Peter. What were the outcome statistics of this paper? What were the limitations of the study design? What is its ability to inform us on cause and effect in any case? Is this a study on human beings locked in labs, for example? Okay? 17 months. No, it isn't a study where people were locked in labs, because no researchers is going to ask an ethics committee, can we lock people in a lab for 17 months? Because the ethics committee is going to say no. No, you can't do that. Sorry. That's if you can get the funding for that, which you won't be able to get because that will cost a swag to do. Okay? Hello? What's next?
Here's another paper, Regression of Atherosclerosis. Yep. This guy, David Blankenhorn, did a lot of work on this, and he found what all types of fat increase the risk of atherosclerosis.
No, not risk. He didn't show that at all, because there are no experiments showing that, Peter. Still, that is still a lie. It's still unacceptable. We'll still stop you every time and say, no, Peter, not risk. No.
So what you want to do is reduce all types of fat.
No, you want to do anything of the sort, in fact. What you want to do is alleviate the Randall cycle issue, the thing actually causing the heart disease. You can do that in one of two ways. One of which will keep you replete with nutrition throughout the lifespan. The other one will have you quitting within 5 years, probably, and citing almost certainly catastrophic health failure born of nutrient deficiency as the result. That's up to you. It's your funeral. Do what you like.
Nathan Pritikin also had said, fat is bad.
Who gives a shit what Nathan Pritikin said about anything whatsoever, ever, on any occasion? Who cares, Peter?
Fat.
Science is done by numbers, not by people. People collect the numbers that they report on. People write nonsense about the numbers they have collected, because they're paid to write nonsense about the numbers they have collected, relying entirely on people not reading those numbers, because they don't have the capacity to read those numbers and understand them. Peter. Sure. But the science is numbers, not people. All right?
Intrinsically, fat is, atherogenic.
No, it isn't. That's a complete lie, Peter. That is false. Atherogenic is a cause and effect statement. And in fact, if you look at the top 5 major meta-analyses on atherosclerotic events as that relates to the reported intake of saturated fat, you will find that in all 5 studies with multi-million person years of follow-up, that all of them find that there is no meaningful or useful relationship between the intake of saturated fat as reported and cardiovascular events whatsoever. In fact, 4 of the 5 don't even find a significant result, despite multi-million person years of follow-up. Okay? So fuck right off.
Obesogenic. It's like the most...
No, obesogenic is also a cause and effect statement. There is no evidence to underpin that claim. It's another piece of fallacious theology from you, Peter.
High concentration of calories there is. It's the opposite.
Calories? Concentration? No. No. You can't concentrate calories any more than you can eat them.
Opposite of low caloric density.
No. Caloric density. Caloric density? Calories have no mass or spatial extent of any kind. Ergo, they have no density. Goodness gracious me. Let's all listen to Peter for science, though. You bet.
Like starches. Okay.
Calories like starches? No. Starch is not a calorie. And calories are not starch. Okay, what's next?
Atherosclerosis, therefore, appears best influenced by lipid lowering.
False. That's just someone's opinion written on a page. This, of course, this paper is an opinion piece. This is a review article. This is a self-selected list of references presented to you, the reader, in the way that is suitable to the writer of this paper. This is not science. This is opinion proffering. Okay?
Yeah. You decrease dietary fat. That's your best chance to reverse atherosclerosis.
False. Completely false.
To the extent that it can be reversed. Okay. Here's this guy, William Roberts. He's the most famous cardiac pathologist in the world.
Says who? Peter, says who?
He does tons and tons of autopsies on patients who die of heart attacks.
So?
And arrhythmias, okay?
So?
And what he says is the most important thing for causing atherosclerosis is elevated blood cholesterol.
Well, so what? That doesn't make that correct, Peter. It isn't correct. Still. It's fundamentally false from the ground up. It's obviously false to anyone with more than 3 brain cells, in fact. Someone's opinion.
Your LDL cholesterol.
Just because you've cut up a lot of bodies and looked inside them doesn't mean you understand what causes the things that occur in those bodies. At all, Peter. It's clear that if this bloke thinks that, it's clear he doesn't understand this at all.
And this other guy right here, Gregory Sloop, he's sort of the best researcher in the world for
Says who, Peter?
Atherosclerosis. He says it's because the LDL cholesterol makes what one would call a it sticks the red blood cell.
So you don't even know what you're talking about here, Peter, at all, do you? You're searching for words. You don't even know how to describe what someone else has erroneously said. You are completely out of your lane and out of your depth here. You are doing nothing but causing yourself more embarrassment. Wow. Keep talking, son.
Cells together. Red blood cells have negative charge on their outer surface.
Yes.
That way they repel each other. But
not necessarily. It depends on the level of that charge and hemodynamic constraints at the time, as well as whether or not that person is grounded to the earth or not, Peter.
If you get something in between them, like let's say this is the LDL cholesterol, it causes the 2 red blood cells to stick together.
No, it doesn't cause anything of the sort, in fact.
So that's overcoming the zeta potential. The zeta potential is a negative charge on the outer surface of the red blood cells.
Okay, what happens if that person is, in fact, grounded to the earth at the time, Peter? Then what? Do you know? I bet you don't. I do.
So the LDL cholesterol is a bridging molecule, meaning...
What are your sources? What are your sources? Tell you what. Do a fucking search. Find your own fucking references, you lazy cunt. Whoever you are saying, references. Prove me wrong on anything. Go ahead.
It overcomes the zeta potential, can stick red blood cells together. Fibrinogen
can do. Ah, that's very different from causes it to occur. Definitely, isn't it, Peter?
can do it. That's the clotting protein.
Yes, fibrinogen can do it too. What's the single biggest cause of fibrinogen dropping out fibrin into the vascular space, Peter? Oh yes, it's inflammation. What is it that is the thing that causes inflammation mostly in humans, Peter, it seems? Well, it's a diet which activates the Randle cycle, thus leading to that inflammation, Peter. Okay. That's the one with the mixed macros in it. The standard diet, the worst possible diet for a human being.
Uric acid can also do it. Okay, when you're stressed...
Yeah, if uric acid existed in your blood, it could do that, but it doesn't. It's urate in your blood. Okay?
Out, you get increased release of acute phase reactant proteins from the liver, including fibrinogen. So that is prothrombotic. And you remember,
yes,
stress effects on the body is being chased by a tiger in the dark. So if the tiger were to scratch you, you would want your blood to clot relatively fast, so to speak.
I think if you're being attacked by a tiger, you're probably not thinking so much about your needs ongoingly at that time, Peter. You're probably pretty much trying anything you can to discourage that tiger from killing you, which it can do at its whim whenever it feels like, because it's got the gear to do that. And you've got nothing to protect yourself with, really. You'd do well to fight off a tiger.
So you don't bleed to death, for example, is thought how that works. Anyways, this is the best book ever written on atherosclerosis.
Says who? Peter. According to what criteria? As established how? Or is this just your opinion again?
Read a bunch of them. And it explains atherosclerosis.
If you've read a bunch of books, Peter, you've read a bunch of books. I've read a bunch of books too. However, I get my scientific steer from the scientific literature, which I have the capacity and ability to read critically, Peter, and that's where you fall down. Books are not peer-reviewed science, okay?
thrombosis theory if you want to understand it. But basically,
if you want to understand atherosclerosis, the last thing you should probably do is read the conventional wisdom on that, because that's a theology as well, not based in science. What do I know, though? I'm only a cardiovascular pathophysiologist, among other things. Retired.
Fat causes your red blood cells to stick together.
No, it doesn't. Wrong again.
And that increases the risk of blood clotting.
No. Because it's based on a fundamental fallacy that you've just said, i.e. that fat sticks your red blood cells together. No, it doesn't.
Sodium vasoconstricts, narrows the arteries. But I make the point.
Sodium causes vasoconstriction now? No, it doesn't. Necessarily at all. Goodness gracious me, you don't understand physiology.
Point is that plant foods are the protective thing.
No, they're not, Peter. Still, your opinion that that is so doesn't make it so, and your production of non-evidential propaganda does not supply us with any evidence that I'm wrong in that respect. Still.
Okay. All right, now here is a paper called Vegetarian Diet and Cholesterol and Triglyceride Levels, comparing the blood lipid levels of omnivores, so those are persons who eat some meat, with lacto-ovo vegetarians, lacto-milk, ovo egg vegetarians, lacto-milk only vegetarians. So the average total cholesterol...
Oh, hang on. Okay, fine, but so fucking what? So, is this a study on health outcomes of any kind? No? Oh dear. Let's see what the paper said and see if it actually says what you think it says, Peter, shall we?
In this study for the omnivores was 208. Okay, there's one other.
You forgot the other statistic right next to that, Peter. It's quite important. It says plus or minus standard deviation of 49.09. So let's call that 210 for easy math, plus or minus 50 for easy math. Let's also make the math even simpler again, because I know you like simple, Peter Pumpkin Eater. Let's say that instead of 1.96 standard deviations for 95% confidence interval, what we really need is 2, because that makes the math easier, doesn't it? So, 210 plus or minus 100. So it's actually 110 through to 310 is actually the range in this group of people, however many it was in this study. So we've got a signal to noise ratio issue here, haven't we? Because every single one of these average numbers, 175, 165, 141, every single one of those is within the noise around the signal, so-called baseline, the omnivores, shall we say, if you're looking at omnivores as your comparator. So these statistics tell us nothing about nothing, especially considering that these statistics are not health outcomes, any of them, at all. Are you with me, boys and girls? Still? Good? All right, let's carry on. What's next?
Other previous studies on average cholesterol for Americans was 220, for example.
Actually, what you'll find is the level of cholesterol in people, which is associated with the lowest mortality from all causes, as well as from every sub-cause passed out individually, the lowest incidence is at 220 milligrams per deciliter.
Anyways, the average total cholesterol for a vegan was 141. And
plus or minus 60. So it overlaps completely the level for the omnivores, doesn't it? And as such, wouldn't even be statistically significant in that group of people, however many it was. Okay. Of course, what they will do is divide the standard deviation by the square root of n and give us a standard error-based assessment on statistical significance, which is just a way of making the gap between two data sets smaller before we can declare statistical significance, but it's of no utility because it's well within signal-to-noise ratio, ergo the data is powerless. Okay?
The significance of that is
I've written a paper on this. It's actually published in the literature, Peter, the difference between standard deviation and standard error and what we're asserting on the basis of it. Perhaps you should read it. Then you'll understand this.
persons who keep their total cholesterol below 150 have a dramatically reduced risk of...
No, Peter, that is false. It is a lie. Completely false. Whatever you're about to say, because you just said risk. There are no studies informing on risk still. There are only associative studies, and the largest available data set in the universe on this topic, Peter, tells us that when you drop your total cholesterol below 220, there is a precipitous increase in mortality from all causes as well as every single sub-cause passed out individually. Okay, that's what the data shows, not what you're about to say. You liar.
Myocardial infarction. And Esselstyn, for example, followed up his patients with the goal of keeping their total cholesterol below 140. And
Why? There's no indication for that.
That's total cholesterol. It's easy to go by total cholesterol, and that works, okay?
No, it doesn't work, though, Peter. Still.
Some people talk about LDL levels. So the LDL level in the omnivores was relatively high at 123.
Plus or minus how much there, Peter? Okay. Plus or minus 85. Now, strictly speaking, I did a two-tail sort of rough calculation before. Let's do it as we would really need to do. If you want to say that, if you want to assert that this is a one-tail test in this population of people, however many there were, then what you would have to do is add 2 standard deviations in either direction. So it's 123, but possibly as low as 43 and possibly as high as 200. So every single one of those data points on LDL also fits within the signal-to-noise ratio, and as such, it has exactly no fucking utility, even as a data point. Also remembering that triglyceride level in your blood, for example, or LDL level in your blood, none of those things are health outcomes. Are they? Health outcomes are, did you have a heart attack or not? Are you dead or not? Are you overweight or not? Over fat is what I should say, or not. Not, what's your blood level of this, that, or the other thing? What's next?
In the vegans, it was less than 70, which is what you want.
No, it isn't, Peter, still.
69 in this case. Okay,
plus or minus 60. So somewhere between 9 and 120. Well, crossing over with the LDL at the very other end with the omnivores. Making the assumption that LDL is bad, which is a false assumption, it's not. Making the assumption that this somehow predicts any health outcome of any kind, which it doesn't. This is just talking about some numbers on a page without even understanding what those numbers are and what they represent, Peter.
Triglycerides were a little high at 155
According to whom? On what basis?
in the omnivore.
Plus or minus 220. Forget it, Peter. Forget it, son.
And in the vegans, they were 81, which is...
Plus or minus 164. Peter. No, okay, let's move on.
It's great, you know, below 100.
You really are a fucking idiot, aren't you? You are the least qualified person to discuss science and its outputs that I have ever come across at any level of education. You are worse than Mike the fucking Vegan, Peter. You are stupider than Hench fucking Herbivore. Which is all thermodynamics, isn't it? Wow! A new champion, the stupidest motherfucker on the planet. Peter Rogers. Congratulations, son.
Okay.
Okay.
So, plant-based diets produce...
So, another nice little picture drawn by Peter here. Some good work, PD. This is great. I love your science, son. What's next?
better blood lipids, low-fat plant-based diets. You don't want to be eating a high-fat plant-based diet.
No, you do, in fact. You want to be eating... Well, no, you don't want to be eating a plant-based diet of any kind, if that's what you just said. I should listen more carefully. What you want to do is eat a 100% carnivore diet, or as close to that as you can possibly maintain. That's what you should do. Prove me wrong.
Oils could be called by some people a high-fat plant food. They're toxic to arteries, all right? So normally your plasma should be translucent. You could
Says who, Peter? On what basis? Why should it be translucent?
You could read print through it versus when you eat a high-fat meal, this becomes relatively opaque. You can
So it becomes opaque because the blood suddenly has to carry the fat that you've just consumed? Well, fuck me, Peter, that's incredible. How long does that last for, and is it important in any way? See, the last time I checked, I really have no need of reading text through my plasma at all. That seems to have nothing at all to do with my health in any way.
no longer, read print through it.
That's it on that? So we can no longer read print through our blood plasma immediately following a meal rich in fat. Well, fuck me. That's a good reason not to eat any fat, isn't it, boys and girls? Anyone who's not yet finished with Peter Rogers permanently, there it is. If sharp pointy teeth didn't do it for you. You fucking moron.
And as I referred to earlier, there are typical red blood cells about 7 microns in diameter.
Yes, we know how many 7 is. Pete, thanks.
Capillary is about 5 microns.
Yeah,
So
we know how much 5 is too.
the red blood cell has to deform itself a little bit to pass through the capillary.
The word is capillary, really, but hey, what the hell. I know, it's in someone that's been brought up with an Anglo-centric upbringing versus American. I get it. It's just for fun, boys and girls. Relax.
When you have one of these bridging molecules around, like let's say LDL cholesterol from eating a high-fat diet, high-saturated
Or
fat,
let's say not, because that's just rubbish, Peter. You haven't provided us with any evidence of this occurring or being a problem in any way, shape or form. Because it isn't.
diet, it sticks the red blood cells together, so it's harder to get them through the capillary. Main reason to have your blood pressure go up is to get blood to your brain. When you're standing, it's the
Well, some of us, Pete, those of us that have one.
highest thing, from gravity. So
Tell us about gravity.
if you're pumping thicker blood,
Don't panic, boys and girls. I'm not suggesting gravity isn't a real thing. It is.
like a milkshake instead of like water, because there's a bridging molecule sticking the RBCs together, pressure has to go up. If you vasoconstrict the arteries, narrow them because of sodium, for example.
Oh, but sometimes sodium doesn't do that, Pete. Remember? Just like most of the time, you'll find that red blood cells won't stick together if you're grounded to the earth, which you should be. Okay?
Pressure has to go up to pump through a constricted system. If you're deficient in potassium and magnesium vasodilators, you're going to be constricted. Pressure has to go up. And typical American is all of those things. They eat high sodium, they eat high fat, and their diet's low in potassium, low in magnesium.
So what?
They screw, and low in nitrates, which is the vasodilator precursor for nitric oxide.
So and now you're suggesting that someone eating a standard diet is not doing themselves any favour. And we agree, Peter. So what's your point?
Screw themselves in 5 different ways to give themselves high blood pressure, and the high blood pressure, the pressure hits against the arterial wall and it damages the arterial wall. The arterial wall will compensate by laying down more collagen, fibrosis, and that's atherogenic in and of itself.
That is what atherosclerotic plaquing is, Peter, you stupid boy. It's got nothing to do with fucking cholesterol at all. Goodness gracious.
So all of this is going in the wrong direction with a westernized diet, okay?
We know that, Peter. We agree. People should not eat a standard diet.
And that means, a high meat, high fat diet. So here's an example of the zeta.
That doesn't mean anything of the sort. The mixed diet is moderate meat, moderate fat diet with moderate carbohydrate as well. Well, moderate, we say. Usually it's an overplus of carbohydrate. That's the problem, Peter. It's not the meat or the fat that comes with the meat. Okay?
Potential. Zeta potential is a negative charge on the outer surface of the red blood cell. And that's because you've got cholesterol sulfates, you've got sialic acids, you've also got other types of sulfates on there causing a negative charge on the outer surface, the zeta potential. An acute infection can also cause the red blood cells to stick together because the IgM antibodies have a positive charge on the surface and they're big enough to
Yes, correct, but so fucking what?
grab 2 RBCs and stick them together. So that's another example of a bridging molecule.
So fucking what?
Okay, so the higher the LDL cholesterol, the thicker the blood becomes.
That's false, Peter. Completely false lie. What's your source on that?
Blood thickness is called viscosity.
Yeah, we know that, but prove the claim you've just made. Because it's false.
These are bridging molecules, like we said, IgM antibody with an acute infection, LDL cholesterol, fibrinogen, the clotting protein raised when the acute phase reactant proteins of the liver are released into the blood, which happens from stress, for example, sleep deprivation, or drinking caffeine. It's another reason why I don't think caffeine is a good idea. Uric acid. Which
no, it's urate in the bloodstream, Peter, not uric acid. And urate does not have the charge required to cause this effect. Okay?
Is elevated from eating meats, also from eating fructose and a few other things in excessive amounts, like high fructose corn syrup. So anyways, normally the zeta potential RBCs should repel each other.
Tell you what the best way to achieve that is, ground yourself to the earth. Your body then absorbs electrons. Those electrons are attracted to the membranes of the red blood cells, among other places in the body, and thus the zeta potential is increased for more co-repulsion of red blood cells, and the viscosity of the blood goes down, quite independent of the LDL concentration in that blood, you mindless fucking buffoon. What's next?
Okay, here's an atherosclerotic plaque. And
no, it isn't. That's your picture of one, Peter, and it's complete nonsense. Absolute, complete fucking nonsense from start to finish.
People often ask,
this doesn't remotely reflect anything to do with what an atherosclerotic plaque looks like, behaves like, or is made up of. This is a fantasy.
Is it reversible? And the answer is it's partially reversible. Again,
it's entirely reversible, 100% reversible, in fact.
And you can reabsorb the lipid core, the fat component of it. You could reabsorb the
Most plaques don't have a lipid core, Peter.
Necrotic core, the sort of dead cells, the acute clot component, which we rarely see, but you could reabsorb that. The more fibrotic, the more acellular the fibrosis part, the collagen, the less likely you could reabsorb that. So that partially reabsorbs.
Yes, but even scar tissue, Peter, can be reabsorbed into the body and be replaced with new functional cells. If you just get out of your own stupid way, allow your body to heal and do everything you should do to encourage that healing, that's what will happen. You will heal over a period of time. The period of time depends on a bunch of things, including individual differences, situational awareness, and all of that kind of stuff. Okay? But yes, you can absolutely heal from pretty much any level of atherosclerotic injury if you allow that to occur and encourage it.
Absorbable. Calcification part, you're not going to reabsorb that. That'll stay the same for decades.
It doesn't mean that it can't be reversed by the body. It can. We have seen multiple examples of people whose CAC score has decreased over 5 years, Peter, let alone a decade. Okay? So once again, no, son. Wrong.
So what you really want to do, though, is prevent them as much as you can. But
absolutely, yes.
Once you go low-fat vegan and you drop your sodium down and you drop your dietary fat down, the endothelial lining cells, they tend to produce nitric oxide and you'll get vasodilation. So you can get a significant improvement in just a couple days.
Yeah, but in 5 years, you know, how many people are quitting the vegan diet and citing catastrophic health failure born of nutrient deficiency as the reason for that, Peter? Because you also find regression of atherosclerotic disease in people who eat 100% carnivore. It's still the diet in the middle that's the problem in this regard. Still. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
And then give it more time, you'll get even more improvement.
Well, no. Give it 5 years and see what happens on a vegan diet. Well, we know what happens because we have the stats on it. And I've given them to you several times just today, so what the hell?
If you follow the Esselstyn diet, for
well, we don't, because we're not fucking idiots, Peter.
example.
Because the Esselstyn's diet also included a statin, remember? The thing that completely confounds that study is being able to talk about effective diet whatsoever. Okay?
Important thing to know about endothelial cells, arterial lining cells, is they make nitric oxide.
Yes.
It goes into the blood, it's a gas, and it prevents the platelets from clotting. It goes
among other things, and prevent is too strong. It works against it, is what you should say.
Backward into the arterial wall, goes into the smooth muscle cells, and gets them to vasodilate.
Sure, but so what?
So, you need to know that. Nitric oxide is...
Yeah, we do know that, Peter, but so what?
Protective.
What does that have to do with whether you think the vegan diet is best or not? Because it isn't, still.
In the arterial lining cells called endothelial cells, and high-fat, high-sodium meals impair its functions. That's why you don't want them.
No, they don't, Peter. There are no cause and effect data sets that can establish that claim. Cause and effect. Claim again.
Okay, high-fat meals also are damaging to blood
No, they're not to anything whatsoever.
flow for other reasons.
No,
They'll
they aren't, Peter. No.
activate the neutrophils, the excess dietary fat, and then the neutrophils will release something called MPO, myeloperoxidase, and that interferes with the...
Okay, then if you're correct, the people that eat more meat should have more mortality than the people who eat less meat, shouldn't they, Peter? So let's go to something like the Adventist Health Study number 2, which when you look at the data collected by those authors, the observations made on their populations, you will find that the highest level of mortality is in the vegan population, and the lowest level of mortality is in the 4th quartile of meat consumption. Okay, so the people over long periods of follow-up who follow a standard diet over a long period of time seemingly actually fare better than people who follow a vegan or close to vegan diet long term. That's what that data would suggest, if anything, in fact. So your mechanistic speculation about how meat might be killing us is not borne out in the data. Is it, Peter? So fuck right off.
glycocalyx, the sugar coating of the endothelial cells, and it causes them to express prothrombotic molecules. So the bottom line is it damages blood flow.
It doesn't, though, Peter, still.
Eating the high dietary fat.
No, it doesn't, Peter, still.
Okay, I've made entire lectures on this. So I go.
And that'll be fucking rubbish too, based on theology, pseudoscience, crackpottery, and a complete lack of understanding of objective reality. Who gives a fuck whether you made another video, Peter? You are a bona fide fucking imbecile.
All the details, but we're not going to go into all that right now. Okay, when high blood pressure comes, it hits the bifurcations at the median divider at bifurcations. This, for example, is in your neck, the carotid artery. So common carotid artery comes up in your neck about here, and then it bifurcates. External carotid goes to the face, internal carotid goes to the brain. But the higher the pressure hitting this median divider of tissue between the two branching arteries, the more it's going to bounce off of there and cause turbulent flow, which just means chaotic flow, and retrograde flow, sometimes called eddy currents.
Yep.
And the more turbulent flow and retrograde flow you have,
Yep.
the more the endothelial cells get confused by that. They've got little...
They're not confused, Peter. They're not confused at all. That's not the problem here. There's a physical problem damaging those cells as a function of that turbulence. Okay? Nothing to do with being confused.
hair cell-like...
We know who's confused, by the way, Peter. We get it. We absolutely understand who it is who is vastly confused. Yes.
part of their glycocalyx that senses the speed and direction of flow. So when it's abnormal...
It's got nothing to do with the glycocalyx per se.
They sense possible injury and they prepare to clot. They'll shed their antithrombotic glycocalyx sugar coating, structural sugar is what I meant in that context, and they'll express prothrombotic molecules and you'll start to form a clot. And that's where you form it, right opposite the median divider. I look at these things every day.
That's not actually, that's one spot where you'll find atherosclerotic plaques. You'll also find it at the bifurcation itself. And you haven't shown that there for some reason. You're also completely failing to pick up on the point that atherosclerotic lesions develop predictably in set parts of the arterial side of the vasculature only. That vasculature, whether it's arterial or whether it's venous, carries the same blood in every part of its geographical surface area. Every single part carries the same blood, carrying the same cholesterol, the same lipids, the same everything. There is no atherosclerosis at all on the venous side of the vasculature, ever. Ergo, cholesterol, lipids, all of that are not the cause of it. We're done. Okay? You're starting to hit on one of the factors that is a cause of atherosclerosis, and it's turbulent blood flow as a function of blood pressure. Good, but that's got nothing to do with the vegan diet so much, or whatever at all.
CT angiograms, this is what you see. And by the way, atherosclerosis is a blood clot. You need to know that if you care.
It isn't, Peter. It isn't at all. That's a thrombus. The atherosclerotic lesion itself is the atherosclerotic lesion, not any clot associated with it. Fuck's sake.
About atherosclerosis. Once you think of it as a blood clot instead of just this cholesterol stuff, cholesterol theory of atherosclerosis causation is a subset. Atherothrombosis
What does that even fucking mean?
is the all-encompassing theory of atherosclerosis.
It's not though, Peter. It's one theory. It's just another theory.
As pioneered by Gregory Sloop, you know, I showed in that book before.
So someone's theory is the best because you say so. You, who don't know what the Randall cycle is or how it functions or what its process is all about, what its purpose is, why it's there. You who can't understand the difference between causal data and an inference based on association. You who doesn't understand even how the data is collected, let alone what it says or how to pick out the bones of it. You who wouldn't know his elbow from his asshole. You who knows exactly dick about fuck concerning this topic. Okay, carry on.
And I was so interested in Gregory Sloop's ideas about atherosclerosis that I called him on the phone and talked to him.
Oh, well. So fucking what?
Yeah, he's brilliant, and he...
Yeah, but that's coming from you, Peter, so he's patently clearly not.
Everything he read, it totally correlated with all my experience. I've been doing angiograms and looking at CT angiograms, MRA angiograms for many years. You know.
So what?
I did a fellowship with the emphasis on vascular disease when I was at Harvard, imaging guided
So what?
surgery, also called interventional radiology. Okay, so I've been
interventional radiology? No. Radiology is a means of looking at tissue graphically to assist in diagnostic process. It is not interventional in any way. Fuck's sake.
trying to understand this for many, many years.
And you failed, Peter. You have failed to understand the most basic tenets of science and its disciplines. You have also failed to appreciate your own destitution of competence in any way. You are Dunning-Kruger with feet.
And I can tell you that's what puts it all together. Okay, now getting back to diabetes. Supposedly my conversation with Bart was supposed to be primarily about diabetes. And what I'm trying to say is it's been known since back in the 1920s and even suspected before that, going back to the 1800s, that the cause of diabetes, hyperglycemia, increased blood glucose, was due to fat.
Well, that's fucking ridiculous, though, Peter, still, isn't it? Absolutely fucking ridiculous. Because taking fat in the diet is not particularly going to raise your blood glucose above homeostatic set point. You're going to really struggle. The same is not true if you pour carbohydrates down your neck, which will readily break down to carbohydrates, which your cells will not take up if they are replete with energy in the form of carbohydrates and or fats already, aka the Randall cycle operating, locking the door from the inside. The cause of the elevated blood glucose is the adding of glucose to the blood. There's no other way around this, Peter. Even an imbecile can see that. You are labouring under the false belief that you should be able to consume any amount of carbohydrate and that your cells will take up and metabolize that glucose carte blanche as long as the sun shines in the sky and even at night time when it doesn't. And that's a false belief. You are not metabolically designed to do that. That is not the goal of health. That is not what you should be doing. Glucose in the bloodstream and in the cells above a certain concentration is toxic and physically damaging to those cells. Your body does not want your glucose above a certain level, ergo, it won't put it there by itself. You have to put carbohydrate in to achieve this. The cause of diabetes, which is elevated blood glucose, that is how it's diagnosed, that is what is treated, that is the symptom that is moderated directly using drugs designed to lower the blood glucose level. Whether they work or not's for another day, but that's not the point here. The point is diabetes is elevated blood glucose, and its cause is putting glucose into the blood. Straightforward.
Dietary fat, okay? And
no, it's not okay, Peter. It's fucking nonsense. It's rubbish.
So when you eat a high-fat diet, blood glucose goes up, and you decrease what is called carbohydrate tolerance.
No, if you eat a diet consisting of the flesh, muscle meat that is, and associated fat of large ruminant animals almost exclusively, and no carbohydrate to speak of, your blood glucose levels out, normalizes and stabilizes at the homeostatic level set by your body, and remains there with very little excursion away from there. So what you just said is another lie. No, it doesn't happen. What you will find is the blood glucose will shoot up in a person who tries to mix their carbohydrate and fat in their diet. That will activate the Randle cycle most powerfully of any dietary pattern, and that will cause an elevation in the blood glucose. Remove the glucose, problem solved. Still.
Meaning that you've diminished...
Because remind me, what is the exact dietary requirement in human beings for glucose? Oh yes, not 1 single gram, ever.
Your insulin sensitivity, and this...
Insulin sensitivity is a construct. It is not a physiologically measurable artifact. It's nothing your body would understand. It's an idea around a proposed pathology that underpins and destroys your natural ability that you should expect to be able to eat as many carbohydrates as you want. It's fucking nonsense. It's rubbish. It needs to go. As should you, Peter Pumpkin Eater. You should go and sit the fuck down and shut the fuck up permanently, because you are a fucking imbecile. What's next?
This guy, Hemsworth. So J. Shirley Sweeney showed this in medical students in the 1920s. His paper was written in 1927.
You're just talking about one aspect of the Randle cycle here, which is that when a person's cells are replete with energy substrate in the form of fats or carbohydrates or a mixture of those already, they will not take in more sugar. That would be poisonous, damaging, toxic, ergo the cells are disallowed from doing so, and any additional carbohydrate that you continue to try and pour into your body will pool in the blood for that reason. Your liver will then work against that by trying to break down that extra sugar into triacylglyceride molecules, de novo lipogenesis, fat storage, yes, and you will become hugely inflamed as well as a result of the activities of the various aspects of the Randle so-called cycle. I say so-called because it's not a cycle. It's badly named. So, we know this, Peter. This is not new information. You are misinterpreting this information based on a fundamentally false construct of what's going on here and what's important. Based entirely on your complete fucking ignorance. Okay?
That you can take a bunch of healthy medical students, feed them a high-fat diet. Within 2 days, they'll convert to being insulin-resistant.
No. The Randle cycle will be activated because you didn't remove all the carbohydrate. Ergo, their cells won't want to take in any more carbohydrate, as is the biological design. That's the body working perfectly as it should, doing exactly what it should do. It's part of the genetic design of human beings, which has survived a very, very long time. Billions of years for the whole lineage of the genetic structure.
And they'll test positive for diabetes on the oral glucose.
No. Oh, on what test?
Tolerance test.
Oh, right. So they're going to test whether or not this person is diabetic on the basis of what? Again, Peter? Oh, yes, their glucose response. Right. Well, so what? The exact requirement for the intake of carbohydrates in a human being is not 1 single gram ever still.
Whereas you feed them, you know, the sugar diet, the carbohydrate diet, and they won't test positive for insulin. Their insulin sensitivity stays good.
So that those people are not eating any fat? What a surprise.
Hemsworth just showed the same thing. If you feed a high-fat diet,
What are these diets, Peter? Did you read this paper to find out what those diets were exactly, how they were made up? No? It's quite clear you didn't. I think you should. Actually go and read this paper, Peter, because it's clear you haven't read it.
Subsequently develop insulin resistance and get hyperglycemia.
No, insulin resistance is still a construct. And it's not a pathology. The thing you're calling insulin resistance is just the Randall cycle doing exactly what it should do.
Glycemia when you add glucose to that, versus if you feed a high carbohydrate diet by itself, it doesn't cause that elevated blood sugar. So
we know that, Peter. We understand that. That's not new information. Neither is it of utility, and neither does it suggest that a carbohydrate diet is better than a fat diet, because it fucking isn't. Still.
it's been known that fat is the main cause of insulin resistance.
No, insulin resistance remains a construct, and fat is one of the things that can impact the Randall cycle in such a way as to make cells present that way, as it should do, still.
Cause of type 2 diabetes.
No, it's not the cause of type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is elevated blood glucose, the cause of which is adding glucose to your blood, when your blood is in no position to dispose of that glucose to your cells, because your cells don't want that glucose because it's not needed. Okay?
Back since 100 years.
Still.
Years ago, about 100 years ago, 1927. It's 2020.
We know what fucking year it is, Peter. Get on with it.
For now, all right. So that's important to know. The reason that's important to know is most doctors don't know that. Okay, and they still have a tendency to recommend stupid things like, high-fat diets to diabetic patients.
Well, that's exactly what a diabetic patient should do, Peter, in fact. Exactly what they should do. You mindless, moronic fucksplat.
So hyperglycemia, the first detectable finding of diabetes is
elevated blood glucose. Still.
Accumulation of fat within...
No. False.
Skeletal muscle cells, and especially saturated fat will accumulate in
false
skeletal muscles. That's called intramyocellular fat.
Yes, and it's a normal, naturally occurring phenomenon of the human muscular system wanting to store substrate for use in energetic purpose, so-called, on site, ready for use quickly. That's part of the normal functioning of the human body, under the conditions of eating a diet rich in lipids and very poor in carbohydrates, which is what a human being absolutely should do, it seems.
That's been proven by nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. I'm going to talk about...
Nobody's questioning the fact that lipids can develop as little packages within the muscular cells. We know this, Peter. This is not new information.
Who led that work, Gerald Shulman, in just a moment.
Yes, Shulman was fantastic. He was also involved with a bloke called Rothman who did a lot of nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy studies. I can't even say it. And what I can do, though, Peter, is do some spectroscopy studies, NMR studies, and I have done. You'll find them in the record of peer-reviewed literature. Have you ever done any studies with nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy? No? I have. So I know who these people are who use this methodology for their studies, and Shulman and Rothman did some great work in the field of exercise physiology. However, the statement that fat droplets in muscle cells is the cause of this so-called insulin resistance, some kind of pathology, is fucking ludicrous. And then blaming that for elevated blood glucose, when the cause of elevated blood glucose is adding glucose to the blood, still is just as fucking ridiculous, Peter. Okay? What's next?
So once you accumulate fat in the skeletal muscle, then it becomes insulin resistance.
No, it doesn't. Still, the Randall cycle will be activated as it should be, and that cell will lock the door to sugar, pretty much. Except for that sugar that it does need, because it will still intake some, even with the fader pulled to max on blocking the sugar intake thing, because contracting muscle cells do need a supply of glucose, a very small one. Okay?
And the glucose you eat in a meal will then not be able to get in the muscle, so you get high blood glucose
level. Right, so don't fucking do that. Problem solved.
Well, after eating is called prandial, so it's...
Yeah, we get that, but eating is also usually refers to the consumption of food, and food for human beings, Peter, is not plants or carbohydrates or fiber. Okay, it's the muscle meat and associated fat of large ruminant animals, mostly, with other animal products thrown in for good measure.
Postprandial hyperglycemia, all right? And a lot of that glucose will end up in the liver. There's also quite often the context of increased...
Only if you eat it. If you don't eat that unnecessary, contraindicated, poisonous glucose, then it won't end up in your liver, will it, Peter? Because it won't be there.
dietary fat and they get a fatty liver. Having a fatty liver is like diabetes of the liver. It predisposes to, worsening diabetes.
Right, so again, the cause is the pouring of carbohydrates at a high toxic level into the human system when it doesn't want that or need that. It's completely contraindicated. It's fucking stupid. It's mindless. It's the worst possible thing you can do, other than eat a standard diet, which will only make that problem worse. Okay?
Fat starts accumulating in the pancreas and damaging the pancreatic beta cells that make insulin.
Have you got some sort of problem with your digestion or health in some way, Peter? All this belching and gastric distress that's going on with you here, clearly. I'm concerned, Peter. I think it's probably down to your ridiculous fucking diet. I do give consultancies, Peter, reasonable charges. Of course, I charge much less than some other clowns who are vastly less qualified to give consultancies than I am. Perhaps you should invest some funds in a consultancy with me and we'll get your health back on track, because at the moment, son... And I'm calling you son not because you're a young man. I know you're actually a little bit older than I am. I'm calling you son basically to condescend as much as possible, because you really are a complete fucksplat. You're a cockwomble of the highest order. You are an ignorant, mindless academic child, despite your years of being an MD. Isn't that amazing, kids?
And the patient, if they continue down this path, they end up insulin deficient with insulin dependent type 2 diabetes. Okay, so what's the point? The point is minimize your dietary fat.
No, that's not the point. That's the stupidest fucking thing you can do.
Especially saturated fat. Which
no, wrong, Peter. There's nothing to underpin that claim existing anywhere in the literature. That's a sensible move for your health. It's not.
Is don't eat animal foods, okay?
No, that's fucking ridiculous, Peter. You're absolutely evolved on eating animal foods for at least the last 4 million years, probably more like 5. Just the facts, though. That's what we know from the physical anthropology and the chemical anthropology as well.
So this is the point I'm saying. Bart K is recommending eat 100% animal foods.
That's correct. I'm doing that because that is your absolute genetic gift. That is your anthropological background. Those were the selection pressures that molded your system as a human being over at least 4, more like 5 million years. That's what you should do, it seems, nutritionally. And when you do that, it seems, we have huge numbers of anecdotes from tens and hundreds and millions, actually, tens and hundreds of thousands and millions of individuals who are eating a carnivore diet exclusively and who are absolutely thriving, and some of them for multiple decades. Okay, we're done. We don't need your ridiculous pseudoscientific claptrappery. We don't need you splashing up for several seconds at a time the title and front page of a number of papers which are completely incapable of informing on the aspect that you're claiming they're informing on, cause and effect, hazard, risk or likelihood. And you want to throw theology at us as well, for good measure. Actual theology, Bible studies and things. Hey, fine, I've got no problem with that, but it's got no place in a scientific discussion about the needs of a human being, nutritionally. All right? We're nearly at the end of our second 2-hour block. So buckle up for safety and let's carry on.
What I'm telling you here with all these slides and pictures is that
What you're telling us with all your slides and pictures, Peter, is that you are a fucking imbecile of the highest order. What you are telling us is that you have not got the first grasp of the first most basic scientific principles. Neither are you remotely connected to this thing called objective reality in which the rest of us find ourselves. You're a fantasist.
Foods are the biggest risk factor for
No, there you go again with the word risk. There are still no studies that inform us on risk extant anywhere on this planet or elsewhere that we're aware of. What's next?
Cancer. They're the biggest risk factor.
No. No risk factors have been identified.
For diabetes.
Only associates.
Okay?
No, it's not okay, Peter. It's not okay for you to lie to people about what is known and what we know about risk of any disease process as that relates to any dietary pattern of any kind is nothing, because risk is a cause and effect statement, and we do not have the data to underpin such a claim. It does not exist still.
Obesity is also dramatically increased by oils, omega-6 cooking oils, for example.
Correct, it seems.
example. And high fructose corn syrup also is a major player in
Yeah, and they're both plant materials, aren't they, Peter?
making people sicker. And there's toxic estrogenic chemicals in the water and the food and the air that are making people fat and sick as well. But what I'm saying is...
So what are you drinking, smoking, or breathing in that makes you so fucking stupid, Peter? We need to know what we should probably avoid, is what I'm suggesting.
If you wanted to do something very quickly to improve your health, it would be to avoid animal foods.
No, that's wrong, Peter. That's completely false and mindless. It's the stupidest fucking thing I've heard since the last thing you said.
You know, animal foods are good if you're starving and there's nothing else available.
Absolute fucking nonsense, Peter. Rubbish.
But
animal products are great for humans nutritionally, period. Because that's what we're designed to eat, period.
Than that, it's best to avoid them. If you're taking any medicines for diabetes or high blood pressure or blood thinners, let your doctor know to help you titrate the dosages before you change your diet. Okay, this guy right here is Gerald Shulman. He's MD, PhD, Harvard-trained endocrinologist.
Yes, we know who he is. I know who he is better than you do, Peter, clearly.
And he's the guy who sort of led the group working with the nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, and they confirmed that accumulation of fat within the skeletal muscle, he calls it intramyocellular lipid, was the first detectable finding of insulin resistance.
No, it's the first detectable finding that they've came up with that corroborates the cycle as proposed by Sir Philip Randall in about 1932 or 3, actually. And it's what we would expect, given our understanding of that so-called cycle, the Randall so-called cycle. There is nothing surprising in this still.
Okay.
Yes. We know who Gerald Shulman is.
And they also would infuse by IV lipid fat, and that would cause insulin resistance. Where they
No, it would cause the Randall cycle to become activated and do exactly what it should do, which is lock the door to sugar pouring into the cell at the same time, because that sugar would not be able to go through the mitochondria in a relatively reasonable period of time, and that would cause glycative damage to the cell. So the cell says, no, thank you. It's what it should do. It's what natural selection is designed for cells. It works perfectly. It is working perfectly. It's not a pathology. Still.
Infuse carbohydrate, it does not. So this is further confirmation that insulin...
At what concentration? Because carbohydrate absolutely will inhibit itself at a certain point as well.
Resistance is due to
If you understand the Randall cycle, you'd know that.
Dietary fat, okay?
Okay.
And also Bart will say, oh, diabetes means high blood sugar. No,
That's because it is. That's what it is, Peter, still.
it doesn't. It means insulin resistance.
No, it doesn't. It means high blood sugar, Peter, still. Remember you said yourself, not 5 minutes ago in your video here, that the way we determine that someone is diabetic is we test their oral glucose tolerance. Again, there's a hint there, isn't there, Peter? Tolerance. If we need to tolerate something, it's probably not something we should be consuming for food. Okay? What's next?
This is a key point. High blood sugar is a symptom of diabetes.
No, high blood sugar is what diabetes is. That's the pathology. That's the thing that damages the system. That's the thing that needs to be ameliorated. It's also the symptom. But the disease is blood glucose-based. Period. That's it.
Okay, and yes, you'll stage diabetes by how bad it is by looking at the hemoglobin A1C, by looking at the fat.
So again, a measurement of sugar damage. Okay, so sugar still.
Blood sugar and whatnot, but the key point is what's causing this problem to happen.
Well, it's still pouring carbohydrates down your neck that your body doesn't need or want, Peter. Still.
And what's causing the problem to happen is the elevated dietary fat.
No, it isn't. Still. It's still the pouring of carbohydrates down your neck that causes the blood sugar diversions upwards away from where they should be. Still.
As the main cause.
No, Peter. False.
Other things that contribute to that. Psychological stress will contribute to it, for example. Elevated cortisol will contribute to it. Caffeine will make it worse.
Okay, so before you even start talking about the study here, a low-fat vegan diet improves glycemic control and cardiovascular risk factors. No, there are no risk factors. There are associates that have been established in the literature hitherto with more or less veracity for various individual cases, absolutely. But again, so I mean, this is a paper written by the known card-carrying High Priest of the Church of Anorexia Vegana and pencil neck extraordinaire Neil D. Barnard, and a bunch of other veganerised fucktards of the highest order. What's the bet this is even a paper that was written by the so-called Physicians Committee on Responsible Medicine, headed by said Barnturd, with a known political agenda, nothing to do with science, a known theological agenda, nothing to do with science. Published where, by the way? What? Diabetes Care. Incredible. So any journal calling itself Diabetes Care that would allow the publication of articles suggesting that a good idea is to increase your carbohydrate intake as a diabetic ought to be shut down, don't you think, boys and girls? Because, well, that's criminal. Simple. That's easy. Not even a difficult argument to make. What's next?
For example. Okay, a low-fat vegan diet improves blood sugar control, glycemic control, and cardiovascular risk factors in type 2 diabetes.
Okay, who were these population, Peter? Are they representative of a population at large? Because the title seems to be generalising to a population at large. How many of them were there? N equals 49. Are we done? Because that's not a big enough study to tell us anything about anything, really. Yeah. Pretty much. And we've got 99 participants split in half, 49 and 50, which is not actually in half, because you should have 150 and 50, shouldn't you? But whatever. Was there a crossover? No. How was the randomization done? Is it in there? What were the outcome statistics, and was it meaningful? Let's see.
So what is the paper saying? It's saying patients do better if you feed them a low-fat vegan diet.
Well, okay, better. Remember how science is done with numbers, Peter? What numbers are we talking about from this study of N equals 99? Where, what did they do? Did they lock them in labs? Control them? No, they left them to go and do their own thing and just believe them that they'd complied entirely with the research methodology as outlined. Okay, well that's no good, is it, Peter? And they were evaluated twice. Once at baseline and once 22 weeks later. That's all, is it? So a short-term study on a small number of people under no control to speak of, doing their own thing, out there in the universe, not locked in a lab for 22 weeks. It's a pretty poor inference, isn't it? Really? Let's see how big the outcome statistic were. Okay, results. 43%, 21 of 49 of the vegan group, and 26%, 13 out of 50, of the ADA group participants reduced diabetes medications. Okay, so what? Including all participants, HbA1c decreased 0.96 percentage points in the vegan group and 0.56 points in the ADA group, but not statistically or significantly, let alone meaningfully, actually. And there's no indication there of the spread around the data sets, none at all. Incredible. What else have we got here? Just nothing. Nothing at all that would excite me as an outcome statistic there on that page. You still haven't made a single point here, Peter, at all. Not a single point.
Diabetics, okay?
Okay.
Low-fat vegan is the best diet to
No,
feed.
it still fucking isn't, Peter. Right, 2 hours is up for our second 2-hour block. Near enough. Join me next time if I can be asked for the last, apparently, third or so of Peter's video, which I suspect will be full of just the same propaganda, nonsense, noise, misinformation, anti-science, theology, fuck-splattery, cockmonkery, and all manner of other misanthropic garbage, I would suggest. See you then. Ciao for now.